Oh, Bev, I believe you've lived in Redfern all your life.
In George Street, Redfern, all my life.
What year were you born in?
1936.
What kind of a kid were you?
Well, we weren't running wild like a lot of them, but we played around here in the streets. We never got into any trouble or anything, but you didn't get into trouble those days as much as they do these days, I don't think. I wasn't going to get into trouble.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
My next sister to me was 10 years after me, and the next one is 2 years after that.
Oh, so you would have virtually been...
I was an only child, more or less.
What are your earliest memories?
Oh, mostly going to the Lawson Theatre on Saturdays and playing down in Coronation Park, down in the playground was called Coronation. We used to go down there in the school holidays and play.
Were there any special events on there? Or?
No, they always had what we call Miss and a Sir, and then if you want to play anything, you were given balls or whatever, and we did weaving and things like that. But we'd go down because my girlfriend came from a very large family, so she had to go down and take her brothers and sisters, and it was closed. Nobody was allowed in except the children, and we would go down there for the day and just play.
Yeah, that's almost like modern vacation care. Or...
Yeah, and in those days you got free milk at school, and in the holidays the milk was given to the playground. And of course there wasn't that many children there, so we'd take a billy down, you could bring home milk. And that.
Did many kids go there?
Quite a few. But you were kept separate. The top end was the girls, the bottom end was swings, and that were the boys, and the bit in the middle at the back was the like small children, and you weren't allowed. The girls couldn't go in the boys' end, and the boys couldn't go in the girls' end.
Did you have swings in the girls' end?
Yes, there was swings and other things that go round, and the top end, but they used to take them in every night and put them out every day.
All the equipment?
Yeah, well, the main equipment's there, but the seat bits used to get put on every day and that. And they also taught us other things. I learnt weaving down there. They had a loom, and we also, when we got older, I played basketball for them down there.
Who ran it?
As far as I know, it was the council. I don't know, but they now have taken the fence down, and they've taken all the swings and everything down, except for the little part where the infants were.
What years are we talking about here? How old would... If you were born in 36, would your memories go back to, say, 41 when you were 5?
Well, I do remember going... Well, I don't know whether I remember or whether I'm told about it, but my mother always used to talk about when the first day at school, and that, because I howled my head off, and my mother said she came home and howled. When she went back, I told her I liked that place and I was going back. And she said she was very upset because she'd cried all day, and I was all right. And I remember in those days, the early days, the milk came bulk, and we all took a cup, and my mother used to go down every day, and they'd fill all the cups with milk, and as you filed out you took your cup of milk, so then they'd wash up the cups and that. And then later on, of course, it went into bottles and that.
And so you would remember mostly then, you'd remember the war years.
I remember my father was what you call a warden, and we used to have practice runs, and he'd go out, which didn't thrill my mother because she'd rather have had him home when that. And I remember under the stairs we kept some food, and that was where we would go if there was any problems. And it's hard to know what you remember and what you were told, like, and talked about. But the night that the submarines came in, my grandparents were round the Lawson Theatre, and they stopped the picture and they came home. I know it was always talked about. I mean, whether I really remember it, I don't know. Because we lived with my grandparents always.
And where was that?
37 George Street.
37 George Street. And now you live in number 7.
7.
What kind of house was that? Was that a terrace?
Yes, that's another... Almost the same as this.
A 2-storey?
Yeah, in structure, yeah, be the same.
And how many... So were that your maternal grandparents? Or?
Yes, my mother's mother and father. When my father married, they were living in Cleveland Street. and my grandparents, and my father lived in Manly. His mother was a widow, and anyhow they must have moved round here, and then my mother and father always lived with them. And most of the time later on her maid and aunt lived with them too.
It must have been a big house, or was it crowded?
Well, we did things that they wouldn't do in these days. I mean, my mother had the bedroom and lounge room upstairs. Well, I slept in the same room as my parents. Always did and everything. Then when the other two children were born, I slept on the veranda. It was closed in, and I slept there, and they slept in the same room as my parents. We never thought anything of it. And then they had a lounge room, and then there was another room at the back where my auntie lived, and then my grandparents downstairs had a bedroom, a lounge room, and then we had a kitchen. So we didn't consider it crowded. I mean, we never thought anything of sleeping in the same room with your parents.
And what nationality are your family?
Well, my grandmother's mother and father, he was Chinese and she was German. They had 15 children, 10 boys and 5 girls. None of them living now. And that. But I still see parts of the family that come from that side. But they're country people. They came from Armidale.
Right. And what about the other side?
Well, on my father's side, he came out from England in 1921 with his mother. But he had a brother here in Australia, but we didn't have much to do with them. We lived in Redfern. They didn't.
Oh.
We were a bit looked down on.
Really?
Yeah. My mother always said, my grandmother, his mother, because of the times were hard, and my father had to contribute to her living here because she didn't get a pension because not born here, and living in Manly was dearer. They found her a flat over here, and like a room over here. She wouldn't stay here. She went back to Manly.
Right.
Redfern was a bit too low class for her.
Really? So.
And that, but we always liked it.
And what did your father do for a living?
He was an electrician.
And who did he work for? Or was he self-employed?
Oh no, during the war he worked for the Australian Window Glass. They were Alexandria. They're part of, I think, is it ACI now? The glassworks. They used to have a place up in Moore Park. But he worked at Mascot. It was called the Australian Window Glass. Then he worked for the railway. Then he worked for, it was originally called A&A, and then Ansett took over until he retired.
And what sort of man was him? How would you describe him?
A very soft but loving father. I mean, all he ever lived for really was his family. I mean, he did everything for us and that, and actually I believe that it was my sister that passed away, that from that minute his health went down.
Really?
And that, yeah, I lost a sister. She was only 30 when she died. And my father, he used to spend hours with her, and that. Same with us, anything we wanted. If we wanted to go somewhere, my father went. Even with my son, because my husband worked a lot of shift work to try and make a bit of money, and that, and he would take my son out. But if my son rang me up and wanted something delivered where he was, I'd ring my father. He'd drive me up. He'd stop what he was doing. For any of us, you ring Dad and he'd come. That's why we miss him now, because anything that breaks electrically, we all go into a fit because we don't know what to do. We're used to anything that happened, you just ring Dad and he would take you or do whatever you wanted, you know.
And as a kid, what sort of places would you go with your father, say?
Well, we always went for drives. We always had a car, and we had family in Wollongong, so we used to go to Wollongong a lot. My mother's sister lived down there, or we'd meet halfway and have picnics and that sort of thing. But it was mostly that, running, going. Sundays we'd go for a drive. My father could just drive around a suburb just looking at houses and things. You didn't have to go anywhere in particular. And that, but he would just drive round up streets, down streets and looking, and that.
All the kids in the back?
Oh, well, there would only be me. By the time my sisters came along, I was, pretty old, like, sort of thing, 10. So I'd be with my friends mostly, and that.
And what about your mother? What sort of a woman was she?
Well, my mother was... she was a good mother. My mother was not as emotional as my father, but we got on very well. I mean, we had a thing with my sisters. I was like their mother, because when they were born, I took them over, more or less. And if they had any problems, they would, when they got older, they would ring me, and we'd discuss it. And then I'd go and have a quiet word with my mother and let her know all about it. And then they'd come and talk to her, and I'd already have it organised, and that sort of thing. And I looked after both of them, my mother and father, although they were down there while they were sick, and that, and looked after them till they died. But as I say, my mother and I, we went everywhere together. We went shopping. People used to think she was my sister, and that right up until she got sick. And my husband lived after we married. We lived with my parents until for about, must have been the first 8 years of our marriage. By then my grandparents had died, and we had a room down there, and I had my son, and my husband got on wonderfully well with my parents.
So that the tradition continued?
Yes, but the young ones these days wouldn't consider it. It was all just automatic. You got married, you moved in home, more or less. Well, you didn't have the money. The younger sisters, no, they had to have a flat, when they got married and move out.
Were your parents religious?
Well, in a way, they didn't always go to church. We always did.
What denomination?
Well, my father was Church of England. My mother wasn't sure whether she was Presbyterian or Methodist. She thinks Presbyterian, but we were non-sectarian. I was rather religious. I used to teach Sunday school, and we always went to church. My mother insisted, as children, we went to Sunday school.
And where did you go?
Well, I was christened and went to the church across the road, which is now the Greek church, St Paul's. Then later on, we went to
sorry.
I forgot what I was talking about.
You were at the Sunday school.
Oh yes. Well, we were when my sisters were born. Just before then, some friends went to what was called the Methodist Mission. It was in what is now Cope Street, and it didn't look like a church outside. And there was a very good minister. He was Dutch, Van Eerde, he was named, and he was a cripple, and he used to do a lot of work around here. He used to chop wood for the pensioners, and he was very well thought of. And my father used to go up there one night a week, and they'd make toys for the Christmas thing. So I went. So my sisters were christened in his house, which was the rectory in Pitt Street, because he was one of those. He never turned anyone away, and he did a lot to help people. And he later left the church because he went to a peace conference in China, and of course everyone thought reckoned he was communist and everything else. And he left the church altogether.
Because he was so upset at his treatment?
Yeah, well, I suppose it was that in the end. I know he moved from here to another church, and he had children round about my age, so we were friends, and I used to run the Sunday school there for a while, and that, but he was very good, and you didn't have to be real religious to be friends with him, if you know what I mean. He used to marry a lot of people in his house who other churches wouldn't marry and that sort of thing. And he christened both my sisters round there. But we always had to go to a Sunday school. My mother said, I don't care which Sunday school you go to, which church, but you had to go. And I did the same with my son till he was confirmed. Then it was his problem, sort of thing.
What was the name of this minister?
Reverend Van Eerde.
And it was the what church?
It used to be called the Methodist Mission. It's now Cope Street. It used to be called Botany Street. It later on became a factory, and then the Aboriginals took it over, I believe. Now it's been, I don't know, I think I've got a feeling it's pulled down.
Oh. Were your parents politically involved?
My father belonged to the Labor Party, and we used to sit up and fold up pamphlets and go around putting them in letter boxes and things like that. But I mean, he didn't talk about it much, but he just belonged to them. And as I say, on voting day, he'd take his car and go and pick up other people, take them to vote and that sort of thing.
Most people would have been Laborites around here, wouldn't they?
I would think so.
Don't remember anything much.
Well, we never, well, as I say, nobody ever talked about politics really, but I know Dad used to bring home pamphlets and we'd sit up and fold them up, and then we'd walk around the street with him putting them in letter boxes and that sort of thing.
In your family, what sort of discipline was used?
Well, Father never did anything much, but it was always a threat she'd tell Dad, but I don't think any of us were ever frightened of Dad. But we got a good smack. It never did us any harm, but we were never...
Who smacked you?
Mother. And that, my mother used to always say, Father only ever hit me twice. I don't know what I did, but he chased me up the stairs and picked up a bar of soap. They used to have long bars of soap you cut. I don't think he hit me with it. He might have threatened me with it. But it's funny, you know, he was very soft, but the thing is, you didn't want him to be told, if you know what I mean. Mum would threaten you'd get a smack if she'd tell Dad, but it wouldn't have mattered, I don't think. He was a bit too soft-hearted for it. And
what would you do to deserve this? If, you know, what was considered sort of a naughty thing in those days if you were in trouble?
Well, answering back, that sort of thing. I mean, you could talk back, but I mean, if you spoke, you know, nasty sort of thing. I don't really remember getting into too much trouble because, to be honest with you, I was one of those children. I was a bit too... Even as I got older, I wouldn't, even right up till my mother passed away, I would never really go against my mother. I mean, I didn't do everything she told me, but I sort of wouldn't turn around and just say no to her type thing. I suppose it's a sort of a respect that you don't have these days. And that, I mean, I didn't try to go against them particularly. I did my own thing, but I wouldn't turn around and say it to them, if you know what I mean. And that, and if they said something, well, that was all right with me.
Were you expected to contribute to the family in any way?
Yes, as soon as my grandmother ran the house when I was young. When I went to work, I mean, I just expected to. I put in part of my money. I gave her so much a week, and I never had to be asked. When I got a rise, I gave her more. And I never thought anything of it.
As a kid, did you have to do anything like that? I think times, in the Depression time, people had to go and collect bottles and water and that sort of stuff.
Oh, no, I never had to do anything like that. Particularly, I know my mother used to talk about the Depression because my father didn't have much work, and he was sent to, he got a job in Cowra, and we went down and lived in a hotel there, but I got whooping cough and my mother had to bring me home, and a few days later my father came home. He was never separated from my mother. If she couldn't be there, well, that was it, you know, sort of thing. He wanted to be together with us. And that sort of thing, but he used to take me. My mother didn't get on with her mother-in-law, don't think anyone did, but she always made sure I went with my father every month or so to visit my grandmother, and that she made me go with him. She wasn't a very grandmotherly type woman, but we went, and as I say, like I was, I think my father was. I mean, he helped keep his mother, even though he had no money, right up until she got a pension. And when she got a pension, she told him he didn't have to give her so much, she only had to give her half of what he used to give her. And that blew my mother's top. She said she wasn't contributing any more, and that because she expected a lot from my father, and he just did it, if you know what I mean. These days they don't do it, they turn around and tell you no.
You know, in the evening, like, say if we're looking around 1946, when you would have been about 10, in the evenings, what did people do? You know, there was no TV then.
No.
So.
Well, I used to spend my time with my grandparents downstairs in their lounge room, because my grandmother was a very country woman. She was very well liked. Everyone liked. She always helped everybody. My grandfather was a very shy person. He never said much. He never showed affection, but it was there. And I'd sit downstairs with them, and he had a set program. We listened to certain things on the radio at certain times, and come a certain time, it was switched off and they went to bed. Didn't matter whether you wanted to or not. He was very regular with his set pattern, you know, and you just did it. But I'd sit down there. They played cards. They used to often have friends over, a couple of men friends, and my fathers would come because my grandfather liked to play cards, and they'd play. Not very often, but I mean probably once every 3 months or so, and that. But we listened to radio serials, listened to the amateur hour. That's where my father got my sister's name from. He heard Loris, and it's spelt unusual, and he heard it on, and Mum always said he woke her up to tell her he'd heard a name he liked. And my other sister was named Beres because my grandmother liked it when I was born, and my mother always promised her if she ever had another girl she'd call her Beres. So we had to wait 10 years.
And would you be involved in the card games and things like that?
Oh, we'd sit around and watch, but we didn't play there because they played 500. I think it's called 500 and that. I mean, which I don't know anything about. But you'd sit around and listen to them talk and that sort of thing.
Did your mother work?
Never. Oh, well, in later life, she worked, if you could call it work. We had a friend who had a sandwich shop, and she used to go up and butter bread. She'd go and spend the whole day there, more or less, but it wasn't a job. She just got a friend would give her a little something for helping, and it was more or less something to do. But I mean, by then, well, I'm talking really the later years of her life. After the children were grown, my mother was never out when the children came home from school. Never. She used to go to town Thursdays, every Thursday, looking at the shops. She would be home before the kids got home from school. And she would never be out. And every afternoon, religiously, we would be washed, and she would put makeup on and get washed before my father came home.
Every afternoon?
Every day she would get up and get changed and do that. And when we were children, you'd get your hair done and washed and that before my father came home. It was every day.
Can you describe your mother's working day? Did she work hard?
Well, there was always my grandmother there. She always did all the cooking. My mother didn't cook until my grandmother died. My grandmother ran the house. She would do. We might go out and do the shopping, but even when my grandmother was the last month when she was dying, she'd sit up in bed and shell the peas because she liked to run, and she would run the money from there. You know, give you money to go shopping and that sort of thing.
And the grandmother controlled the money.
Yeah, we gave her money, and she controlled the shopping and that, and she did all the cooking. But I remember in later, well, not too later years, I had an auntie who lived in Auburn, and she would come in Mondays. On Sunday night we would put the clothes in the copper, and Monday morning as soon as we get up we'd light the copper and get it all boiled, and then my auntie used to come in and help with the washing, and we'd put it all out, and then we'd take turns doing ironing and things like that, and that would be her day. And then her husband worked in here, and he would come up and they would have tea, and then they would go home. Every Monday we did that. But I don't remember my mother working particularly hard because there wasn't that much in. But everybody went and swept the footpaths of a day, and that's where you would all meet because the other women didn't work, and everybody talked to everybody else. I go weeks now and I never see my next door neighbours. We all saw each other because everyone would be out in the morning sweeping the footpath.
And that would be a morning thing to do?
Yes, everybody'd come out and sweep, and you'd talk to the people next door, and the kids would come out and you'd play with each other, you know, sort of thing. But nobody sweeps the footpath these days.
What can you remember about the war years? How did that affect your family? What was it like?
Well, my father didn't go because he was in an essential industry. I had an uncle in the merchant navy. We had friends in the merchant navy who used to come, and but we didn't have anyone. Oh well, there was a woman lived 2 doors up, and Mrs. Moore, she had 2 sons at war, and they used to send me things. I still have them upstairs, a handkerchief, and it's got Jerusalem written on it. And they used to live next door, and my mother, I don't really remember, but my mother used to always tell them I'd go next door, and Mrs. Moore used to make, her husband used to make them all move up and make room for me to sit down, and I'd spend time with them. And the boys, when they wrote home, because they were a lot older than me, would write letters to me. And as I say, I've got 2 hankies, another couple of hankies, I don't know where they come from, that they would send to me from the war. But I mean, it didn't touch us very much except for the practice with the air raids and things.
Tell us about that. And I believe there was a siren or something.
Yeah, a siren would go off, and then we would go and... I do remember the windows of the house, they had bandage glued to it in crosses. We had it all there, and we had to have blinds so that when the sirens went off, you had to make the place so that no lights showed.
But was it blacked out most evenings, wouldn't it be? Blacked out.
I don't think so. I don't remember. Possibly, but I do remember the windows being all bandaged, and I remember Dad, when the siren used to go, Dad used to go off. We had on the front door, up on top, a sign with Warden written on it, and he had a tin hat and a gas mask and that, and he had to take it off and go off. I don't know where he had to. That's right. They used to go along the street to check that you couldn't see any lights, and that didn't worry us particularly. I do remember we used to go across to Manly by boat, and the lights used to go out crossing the heads. They always put the lights of the boat out when they crossed the heads, so nobody from out at sea could see the boats going across.
Was there much fear? Like the Japanese got into the harbour, and can you remember any sense of what it was like when that happened?
Well, as I say, my grandparents were at the movies and they were sent home, and we had a blackout, but I don't...
Did you ever have to go into shelters?
No, there was all shelters down here in the school, alongside the school in the park. I don't know whether they're still under the park, but we never had to go in them or anything.
Didn't you have to do practice drills or anything like that?
Don't remember doing any. No. As I say, the only practice was the Warden thing Dad used to do.
And he used to do that?
Yeah, he'd go, but then we'd all go out and sit out near, like, under the stairs until the sirens went off and that. And there was searchlights always around, but... and the other thing is, in this park, I don't know why, we called it Exhibition Park as well. There was a big building down where the swimming pool is. And from what I remember, it was called Exhibition Building. Don't know what it was used for. It was rather a fancy building. And I do remember we used to run round it playing. The Americans had it and used it as a store while the war was on. And I remember, I think that was after the war, we had coupons, because my mother wanted a watch, and she went down to buy a watch, and she had a choice of 2, a white face or a black face. There was only so many sold a day. You had to be there when they opened, sort of thing. And same, I remember my mother buying me a doll, and there wasn't much choice. You went down and you sort of had a choice of 1 or 2, sort of thing, and that was the sale. They were only to sell so many a day. We'd save our things, you coupon. We didn't have much trouble with food because they found out my grandmother had a spot on the lung, so she was given, and she was a diabetic, she was given extra coupons. She lost her sugar coupons, but we got extra butter and milk because she was to have extra.
Can you remember much about the American presence in the war?
Well, I was a bit too young. I didn't know too much about them. As I say, we had a friend who was in the merchant navy. We got... my uncle was friendly with him, and he came and became very friendly with my parents. And I know he used to bring my father American cigarettes off the boat. He'd take my father on the boat and bring them off under their coat. They thought it was a great thing to get American cigarettes and that, but we never mixed with anyone or anything. I don't think we really knew around here much of it going on. It was not as children, the adults might have, but we never worried much.
Did the siren, the airway siren, frighten you?
I don't remember ever being frightened of anything.
Okay, well, who were your friends? Well, now, we're probably talking a bit across the war period and a bit after.
Well, I was friends with the Hireless up the street, and they were a very large family. So everywhere my girlfriend went, we had to take 2 or 3 children with us. And being an only child, more or less, I used to go up there, and I used to think it was great, to help doing things and that, and looking after the children and that. But and then we had next door to us the Clancys. They were quite a few children there. I used to spend a lot of time there. And when we had people across the road, the Hydes and the Falanis, we always played in the street at night. We'd play hidings. We'd go up the lanes, which you wouldn't do these days, and hide and that until not too late at night, but after dark we'd run.
You were talking about the Hireless, and the Clancys. Who else was there in the neighbourhood?
Well, the Hydes across the road, which is still one of the women lived there that was married to one of the Hydes, I still see, and the Falanis, and the Johnsons up the street. But we all went on Saturday afternoons to the Lawson picture theatre. My parents used to give me 22 shillings to go, and I wasn't allowed to go downstairs. My mother thought they were too rough down there.
What would go on downstairs?
I don't know, but I was to go upstairs, and my girlfriend didn't have much money, because being in a big family, so we used to pool our money, and she would come upstairs with me. It was 6pence downstairs and 9pence upstairs. I don't remember the price of buying lollies or anything, but we never seemed to, be short of anything. But I got 2 shillings.
And did the kids go just rough downstairs?
Well, my mother thought they were.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that they were, but she thought that we weren't allowed to go downstairs. I had to go upstairs.
And what sort of films did you see? They're mostly American?
Well, I don't remember the films much, but I do remember we watched the serials. You used to get Tom Mix and all those, and you'd see each week it'd continue. You'd see a bit each week. And that sort of thing. But we went, and then when we got older, even up to when I was going to work, we'd go 3 nights a week to the pictures, because Monday and Tuesday was 2 movies actually, but one, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday was different, and Saturday night was another different one. And I'd go with my girlfriend, and then when we'd finish, we'd run home together. She lived up the street, and she'd stand outside till I run down, and she'd see me go inside my house.
And as a kid, you'd go, once a week?
Well, yeah, when we were small, we'd go Saturday afternoons.
Oh, and that was with your friends?
Yeah.
All those families that you were talking about, what sort of jobs and that did the parents have in those families?
Well, I don't know. I don't even remember too much about. I remember the kids more than anything, but I know the ones next door, Clancy's. He worked at the tip. Like, he used to see the trucks go in and out, and we used to get things off them that went in that didn't go into the tip. Sometimes things like chocolate that had got too close to the heat, and it gets that white on it sort of thing, and he'd bring them home. And of course everybody shared in those days, give you things and that type of thing. The Hireless, he worked at STC. I don't know what he did there. But we had the hotel across the road from us. I know my grandmother and mother were very frightened when 6 o'clock closing finished. Well, it was going to be till 10, everyone had thought, but actually it turned out better. We used to sit out the front on Saturdays at 6 o'clock. You could guarantee there'd be a fight over there.
Really?
It was our entertainment, watching the fights over there, when it had closed and that. But we never got, my father never drank like at the hotel or anything. He'd have a drink at home, but I mean, he wasn't a drinker ever.
And now your friends, what did you do together? What sort of...
Well, we spent most of our time either at the movies or we'd go down to the park. I mean, we were sent down to the park and we'd go down and you'd do your own thing. I mean, you'd get a ball off them and play a bit of basketball or just play on the swings, and that you didn't go anywhere that much.
Can you remember any adventures that you had?
Well, the only thing I remember is my mother used to tell me people up the street up from us had ferrets, and I went up and their daughter and I fed the ferrets stones and killed them. Put stones in their mouth and killed them. My mother said she thought she'd kill me then. And
they ate them?
Yeah, I don't know how we did it because I don't particularly remember. My mother used to always say she thought she'd kill me. We went up and killed the poor bloke's ferrets. We fed them stones.
Were there any other adventures that you had?
No, we never got into too much. Oh, well, I don't know about an adventure, but I fell out of our car once while it was going on. My father had taken me somewhere and we'd gone up the side street. He was going to do a job for two old ladies. When we got in the car, the door only stopped on one catch. When he did a U-turn, the door went and I hung onto the door and I went out with it, which wasn't very thrilling because I hurt my leg, and my father left the car in the middle of the road and grabbed me and took me inside. And ever since then I've always been very nervous of car doors.
Yeah. Did you roam very far?
No. Because even now, it's amazing if you mention streets in Redfern that are, a few blocks away, we don't even know about them, sort of thing. We were very isolated we did all our shopping down Botany Road and we really didn't go very far.
Did you have toys?
Yeah, we were never deprived. I mean, we were considered, I suppose, being deprived children, or worse, circus thought we were. But I know my friends, because they were in a big family, her mother used to have comics, but they were like newspaper, that type, and they would go round every week and she would buy them, every one of them, and they all shared them, if you know what I mean, because with a large family. But see, I was being like an only child, it wasn't really a terrible problem. I mean, I might not have had as much as my son has, but I was never deprived of anything. We had dolls and things.
Why did Worth Circus think you were deprived?
I suppose because we lived in Redfern.
Really, that was the reputation of the place?
I suppose we were considered working class, not having much.
Did you feel deprived?
No. I mean, even looking back now, I don't see that we were deprived at all. We were never hungry, although I do remember my father used to bring home the chefs at work. We thought chicken was something special. Not that I particularly liked it, but my father would, sometimes the chef at work would give him a bit if he worked overtime, and he'd bring it home to Mum, and we thought it was marvellous. But I mean, we were never hungry. I had a grandmother who, if people turned up, I don't know, there was always, didn't matter how many turned up, there was always enough. But it was plain stuff like stews and baked dinners and things like that. We always had dessert. I mean, she always used to make, even if pastry, and then she'd fill it with either jam or treacle, and we had dessert every day. It was just part of life, to cook desserts with the meals.
What about books as a child?
I was never a reader. I've turned into one in later life, but I was never particularly interested in reading.
Were there books in the house?
Yes, not a lot. I don't, as I say, we used to listen to the serials and that on the radio. I wouldn't say any of us were great reading people, but I can remember around near the Lawson Theatre there was a little shop and they used to sell things, and they also had a little library. We'd go around and borrow books, and I can remember where Dad worked, they had a library because I used to read Georgette Heyer books, and he'd bring them home from the library for me, and that sort of thing.
Were there places that you weren't allowed to go as a child?
Oh, yes. We weren't allowed to hang around anywhere, if you know what I mean. Hang around the streets. We either went to friends' places or we went down the park. You weren't just allowed to wander or anything.
Were there people you had to avoid?
Oh, not particularly. Only the hotels, because in those days, especially with 6 o'clock closing, a lot of people would come out. But what made me laugh, because I wasn't a child then particularly, but just before my grandmother and them died, she was quite horrified with the new Australians moving in. We get next door, which I always thought was rather funny, seeing her family background.
Yeah.
And now I know we had an Italian family move in next door. Before they come, she was quite horrified at the thought of it. But we always got on very well with them.
What year was that when the Italians moved in?
Oh, well, my grandmother died when I was 19, so it would have been just before then. I mean, the thought of new Australians moving in, foreign people moving in around, really she thought things would go
Now she was
bad.
part Chinese.
Yeah.
Did she look Chinese?
No. Although now I look at photos, I can see it in them, you know, some of them, the relatives particularly. But my mother was blonde because she took after the German side of the family. All her sisters and her brother were much darker. And that, but I can remember Nana was quite upset that, she thought things were going to go downhill fast, which seems strange.
Yeah. Was that a common attitude in the neighbourhood, do you think?
I would think so at that time. But of course, once all the new Australians moved in, nobody really worried, because next door to us, the other side, came a chap, and the minute he came, we went in. I can remember my mother going in, and he was sort of roughing it there and helped look after and that. And as it turned out, his wife came out, and then we were very friendly. We always helped them and took them everywhere. And then it's her brother that I married. He came and lived there, and I ended up married. And with 3 daughters, none of us married an Australian born. Oh, well, one brother-in-law was Australian born, but his mother was from Greece. So my mother always said she didn't care who we married as long as we were happy, and that she didn't worry about those sort of things.
So the reality when they moved in was that they were accepted and...
Well, yeah, I can remember, as I say, the Greek people moved in the other side, and they must have moved in just before my grandmother died, around about that time, because my grandfather lived another 10 months, and in with my sister-in-law, who wasn't then, came some single boys, and that they used to live there. And my grandfather missed my grandmother greatly, because they'd all never been parted either. And we used to invite them in. We had a pinola, and we used to have them in and try to teach them English and that sort of thing. And my grandfather, who was very shy and didn't get on really much with anybody, was greatly relieved. They came in and were friendly because it sort of kept him occupied. And we had them in there, and we'd take them out with us driving on Sunday to show them around Sydney and that sort of thing. So we really took to them, if you know what I mean, particularly I think as they turned up at a time when we'd just lost my grandmother, and we were trying to keep my grandfather busy, sort of thing, you know, bring company and that, and they'd all come in and we'd play the pianola and that.
And share food?
Oh, well, they would send things in, but we'd more teaching them things. I can remember when my sister-in-law came to Australia, she was out there putting clothes on the line, tacking them on the line instead of pegs and things like that. Yes.
Sewing them.
Yeah, running a stitch along and that, or putting pins in them and things, because I mean, when they arrived, they didn't know where to go and buy things and that. And that sort of thing, and they'd always bring us in things, and I used to spend a lot of time with them, but by that time I was 18.
Were there people that you were encouraged to be with?
Not particularly, yeah. As I say, my parents were never particularly, you wouldn't call them snobs or anything, because I mean, we had a family just down from us, a Jewish family, and we got on very well with the Cohens. We always got on well with them because she used to always, if my father was sick, she'd send up soup and things, and because my father was particularly well liked in that he was a person that anybody wanted anything, he'd go and help them, and he used to do jobs for them and that, and we got on well with them. And then the Clancys next door, I suppose, would have been considered a bit rough compared to others, I suppose, but I mean, I spent all my time in there with them, and my mother never objected, and we got on well with them.
Where did you go to school?
Cleveland Street.
What was that like?
Well, I went there, I got on well with the teachers and things, because my cousins had gone there earlier.
Was it a big school?
Yes, so it was, girls went there till they were 12, and then they went to high school, but the boys' part was high school. It went to high school. It was mixed till you went to primary, and then it was girls and boys.
And were girls encouraged to go on to high school and further study?
Well, I remember, I went from Cleveland Street to George Street, but for only 1 year. They only had 1 year in high school at George Street.
And then?
And then I was supposed to go, I think it was Gardeners Road. And I can remember the teacher, there was 4 of us, or was it 6 of us, the teacher had a little talk to us, and she said, the headmistress there doesn't like the girls from Redfern. She said, you'd do better to go to Randwick. So we were sent home in the middle of the day to ask my parents whether I could go to Randwick High School. And then we found out when we went to Randwick High School, the headmistress had changed there. But it didn't make any difference. But I left before I did my intermediate. I didn't particularly like school. Any excuse to stay home. Actually, if I was sick, I had to have castor oil, and I would sometimes have castor oil rather than go to school if it was spelling day.
So were you a good student?
No, well, I mean, I didn't muck up at school particularly, but I mean, I did all right until I went to high school, and I don't suppose I was into that much studying. But
what happened that changed that?
I don't know. I just didn't seem to. Well, I was never good at spelling. I didn't like that, so that held up a lot. But I was quite good at other subjects. But I think when you got to high school, it was much harder. We did things. I mean, we were put in the wrong class to start with when we went to Randwick. We put down for domestic science, and we put in with typing and that, which we'd never had any interest. And then we were changed. They let us change after a while. But I was friendly with a woman at the church because I was teaching Sunday school, and she was the forelady at a small dress factory. And so I left school as soon as my birthday was up and straight into a job. Can I get that?
And so you started working in the dress factory?
Yes. I stayed there for 4 years until I had a nervous breakdown, and then I had to leave.
What brought the nervous breakdown on?
Oh, well, I'd had one when I was very young, much younger. I don't remember. I went to a movie once and then I couldn't sleep after it, and I ended up down at the Children's Hospital sort of thing. But actually it turned out I had a thyroid problem. But what I suppose brought it on was my grandmother had died and my grandfather had died. So that was pretty nerve-wracking time because we lived all together, you know.
And very close then?
Yes, very close to my grandmother. Actually, I was with her when she died. She died at home and I was holding her when she died. So, you know, we got on very well together. I think you have a different relationship with a grandparent because they don't have to make you do anything, if you know what I mean, but so you spend a lot of time with them.
And as a child, what was the movie that you saw?
Well, the one I went with a friend. I went with a friend, and I'm sure it was called, I've just checked on it recently, Cross of Lorraine. Don't remember anything about it, but I know I didn't sleep after it.
Really? It's a really unusual reaction, isn't it?
Yeah, I was told there are a lot of dead bodies. If you know, excuse me, I will have to have a drink.
Oh, so that film upset you?
Yes.
But otherwise, your childhood was very happy, wasn't it?
Extremely happy. I mean, if I wasn't with my mother, I was with my grandmother. And in those days, the family was close. And I had an auntie at Auburn and an auntie in Wollongong. The one in Wollongong had a big family. And we always visited and that.
And there was visiting between the houses in the street here? You know, with the different neighbours?
I wouldn't say. You met outside. You really didn't visit to go to each other. The children did. I mean, we went in and out of each other's houses, but the adults wouldn't go down for cups of tea or anything like that, really. But if you ever wanted anything, if one was sick or the other, someone would always do your messages and things like that.
Wow. Now back to the school. What can you remember about Cleveland Street School in primary years there? Any notable teachers?
Oh, yes, I always remembered. I went back to school after I left there to see, because there was a couple of them. It was a Mrs. Dickerson and a Miss Shropshire, which I always remember Miss Shropshire. She used to have butterball lollies, and if you were good, you got them, and if you were bad, you got a feather duster. And I used to tell everybody, and she didn't get the feather end either. She used to hold that end, and you get it across your fingers. But you would have deserved it, you know. I suppose these days you mightn't have called it deserved it, like talking in class or something, but I mean, you would have disobeyed the thing.
The rules of no one.
Yeah, and she used to divide you into 4 rows, and you'd get marks like stars on the board, and the row that got the best of the week would get butterballs each when you went out. But you had more respect for teachers in those days. I mean, you didn't call them by their first name like some of them do these days. And teachers dressed not in casual clothes, and you did what you were told. You didn't question it, I don't think, like they do today.
And there weren't discipline problems at the school?
No, I mean, well, it could get kept in. I mean, I don't know why, but I know I was kept in once, so was the girl Clancy, and her mother decided she shouldn't be kept in and came down and told the teacher off and grabbed her and me and brought us home. It was like that, if you know what I mean. If you stuck up for one, you stuck up for the other one with you. I happened to be kept in too, and she just grabbed the 2 of us, told the teacher what she thought and brought us home.
And your mother didn't object to her
No.
liberating you like that?
No. I mean, she was sticking up for us. I don't remember Mother ever saying anything, but...
Well, it certainly didn't sound as if the parents were cowed by the teachers.
No, and I think I got a feeling my mother would have gone to the Parents and Citizen. I know I did later on, because I know she went down to help with the milk, and when they had like fetes and things and that, she always helped at those sort of things.
Were there things like that happening in the community, like fetes? Or, you know, before you mentioned Worth Circus.
Yeah, well, that was one of the great things, because they came every Easter to the park, and we woke up, the hotel across the road from where I lived.
What's the name of that hotel?
Used to be called the Star.
Okay.
And they had a veranda upstairs. It came right out the width of the footpath, right over the footpath, and we knew the people there. I can remember playing up on that, and under that it had a horse trough. And we'd wake up, probably about 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd hear the rattling noises. When you'd get up and rush and look out the window, and it'd be the elephants pulling up they didn't use trucks, elephants actually pulled up, they pulled into Alexandria goods yards by train, and then the elephants would pull up the other animals and all the equipment up to the park.
This is the exhibition park.
Yes, and Prince Alfred there. And we'd watch them go past, and you'd see them. And then there was no water down there, apparently, because they'd bring up the horses and the elephants twice a day to the trough across the road. There was another trough outside Cleveland Street School, and they'd bring them to these troughs to water them. So we'd get a sort of a free show. You'd see all the animals come up. But it used to be wonderful to wake up and you'd see them coming up, because then every night after tea you would go for a walk down the park and walk round and look at the animals and talk to the circus people, who we rather thought were rather wonderful. And so you had something to do of a night. and that. And then on Good Friday, you would take a mug with you and line up, and you would get ginger beer and a free hot cross bun and go in, and then they'd put on a small circus for you.
For the local kids?
Yeah. I always, I remember it being said that they thought we were deprived, so they'd give us a free show and that. But I think, from memory, I think Mrs. Worth used to come down there, you know, and speak to you before and give you the free show. And then all over Easter, the Salvation Army put up a tent on the other side of the park, near the school, and they would come down over Easter outside the hotel there, and with their band. We all thought it was wonderful. Everyone came out to watch the singing and that, and they'd come round if you'd stand at the front gate, and they'd collect money, and they'd give us little squares. They had little texts on them. They used to cut out like religious texts with a picture. We'd save them. We thought they were wonderful. And then we'd all go down on Good Friday and sit in the tent and watch. I don't know why we went to religious ceremonies, but to watch.
Easter Sunday?
Well, they'd come Good Friday. They'd be there all over the Easter weekend, and that. And they would stay the weekend, and then they would go. They'd have a very big tent there.
Was it viewed as an entertainment, or did you get converted?
Oh, I don't know.
And so was the religious thing viewed as an entertainment or as a religious experience?
No, I think it was more entertainment, although I do remember another time a tent show came down. They were, I suppose, what we were called evangelists, but these used to play musical instruments and all, and we all went down. I mean, we always went to religious things. I don't know that we were... We lived a religious life in that we tried to behave, sort of thing, you know, be kind and all that, but we didn't go to church that much, or I used to. I used to go with old Mrs. Moore. She used to take me to church and all that, because I always hung around with older people and that, which was a thing my father also did. We made friends as we got older, usually with older people and that.
Just a funny question. Sex education, was there any?
Well, the only thing I remember, particularly with my mother, we came from a very shy family. My grandfather used to have a fit if you walked in the room and he was getting dressed or anything, you know. And I can remember, not that we took much notice because we slept in one room and that, but I do remember we had a book. There was mother and daughter, and they had a thing at the Lawson Picture Theatre. One night was for females and one night was for men, and the women took their men, the daughters along. That's the only time I remember anything, and I know mother, she'd give you a book and that was it. I mean, we didn't discuss it.
Now, who organised this thing at the Lawson Picture Theatre?
Well, I think it was a thing that went around different suburbs. I mean, I got a feeling it wasn't just there. I mean, I know...
And tell me about that. What did they...
Well, we were as embarrassed as hell having to sit there through it with your mother, sort of thing. But I still don't think I learned too much.
Did they have a film?
Yes, it was a film on it, and then you bought a book. As I say, there was two books. One was mother and daughter, and the other was father and son.
And was there a speaker who could answer questions? Like
I don't know. It was just a film, as far that I remember.
Mm.
And that was it. Because I know right up until I was married, I didn't know much at all. I mean, you knew where babies come from. I wasn't sure how they got there. I remember being young, I used to wonder how your body knew you were married. Why? Because in those days only married people had children, more or less. Or you thought they did. Although I found out later that an auntie of mine had a child years ago. We always thought of her as, she always told us it was her niece. It's only in later years I found out all about it. And that. But I mean, it just was, you didn't talk about it.
A scandal, if you'd got pregnant before you were married, how would that have gone down in your family?
Well, it wouldn't have gone down very well. Not at all. Because, in later life my sister did. and it didn't go down very well at all.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, it just wasn't done. I mean, what would the neighbours say?
Was there a lot of that, like what would the neighbours say?
Yeah, and I mean, it would have been a worry of what the neighbours said. It was very important, I think, that you sort of had stayed the same. I mean, they didn't do it, so you didn't do it. And of course, I suppose I was, I don't know, when I look back, I was so good compared to some of them these days. I often wonder how I survived in life, because I can remember a boy asked me, could I go to the pictures, and I must have been 16. I made him go in and ask my father. I mean, these days they wouldn't consider that, you know. And that, but I made him go. I said he'd have to ask my father if I could go.
In the families, in the neighbourhood, you said that one of the entertainments was watching the fight after the 6 o'clock closing across the road at the pub. Would they have been locals fighting, or or was it other people?
They weren't neighbours, if you know what I mean. They weren't people you knew.
And that, if a neighbour had been involved in that, that would have been viewed fairly scandalously.
I should have think it would. I mean, I don't know who they were when you come to think. It was just that there was occasionally fights on Saturday night type thing, especially when at 6 o'clock when they would come out. You know, they'd all be they'd had a few quickly before they went home and that. But I don't remember any of the neighbours.
So, if there were problems within a family, they would try and keep it within the family, within the home. Like, it wouldn't be publicly known.
I don't know that any of them particularly had. Well, we didn't know of any problem. I mean, we knew all the neighbours. I mean, the people across the road were relatives of a friend. She was my mother's friend when they were children. Her daughter and I knew each other, and we have sons the same age. We still are friends. We have friends that you don't visit. We don't see and that, but occasionally we ring each other. We keep in touch. But if I had a problem, I could go to them, if you know what I mean, that type of thing, and it goes through 3 generations. And then they were related to the people next door, and everybody knew everybody, and people didn't move. So very rarely moved, so you all knew each other. I mean, everyone around there lived for donkey's years together, and we all knew each other. And I don't know that any of them had particularly any.
I have to change tape. Tape 2. Interview with Mrs. Bev Karonidis, 26th of 9th, 94. Talking about the neighbourhood, what sort of neighbourhood was it? You know, was it working class residential? Were there many factories or?
Yeah, well, there was quite a few working places. I mean, on the corner here used to be Leroy Tracy's. One of our entertainments was they had, I only remembered it, I saw them last night. There was machines, they print office stuff, they pick it up, you know, they pick up each page. We would look through the window, if you looked real hard, you could see these machines. It was fascinating to us. I mean, kids these days, that's nothing with video. And then there was the foundry down the road.
What foundry was that?
It used to be a iron foundry, but it is now a brass foundry, and I'm only told they've got to close next week. Because, see, the newer people coming in complain about it, which annoys me because it was there before them.
And they're closing because of complaints?
Well, I know they have to move, and they had to move, and they have moved big part of their operation, but I've only been told that they're closing this week, and I've told somebody in the back street, people put in a complaint of the pollution and noise. It's not that noisy. I know years ago when the new people started to move in, we've got a different lot of people moving in now. Now that we've got a lot from the opera company, the museum, from the house I sold, my mother's, I sold to a chap who and his wife are part of the opera company orchestra, and there are another couple of them around. And also there was people living down near my mother. She was an artist. There was another one, she's I don't know what she was, but he's a designer. I mean, they're different to what were when I was young, and they complain about things. I know they took a petition round to my mother about the foundry years ago, and my mother wouldn't sign it. She said it didn't worry her. Years ago, it used to be a bit dirty. One day a week, they used to have black stuff come out, smoke and that, and you wouldn't put your washing out. But they don't now, and we don't object. I object to the parking and stuff now, but I tell them all, I was here before them, so I've got a right to complain. I don't think the ones that come after have got a right to complain about things that were here for years. I mean, the place was more alive. We had factories, not a lot, but there were a few of them round. You'd have working people and that.
Would most people work locally?
Reasonably close, I mean, but also you knew the people that worked. I mean, the chaps at the foundry, they would know you. And just round in Cleveland Street here, there's two nice cottages. One of them we used to call Spruceau House, because they used to make Spruceau hair oil there. And one of the chaps from there, they used to also make a product called Peach Cream Beauty, I think it was a hand lotion. And the chap used to work there, used to walk a couple of dogs, and we'd call him Mr. Spruceau, and he'd give you sometimes a bottle of the hand cream, because you knew them and that sort of thing, and you knew people who worked around. But there's not much around here now. I mean, most things have closed. I mean, Botany Road, we used to call it Botany Road, it's called Regent Street. We always went down there for shopping. There was nothing you couldn't buy. There was winds and glasses for shoes. And when my son was young, I'd walk down there twice a day just to take him for a walk. But you didn't go into town particularly, and you bought everything you needed was here. Well, there's nothing there now, more or less. It's amazing what is closed. And
it was a safe neighbourhood, do you think?
We felt it was safe. I mean, as children we were allowed to play out even after dark. We'd go up the side lanes and things like that, just within a small area.
Even with a pub across the street?
Well, it was 6 o'clock closing, so there wasn't any when we were young.
You weren't worried about finding people who passed out in the alleys or anything?
No, we never worried about anything like that. And we'd sit out the front of a night. You spent a lot of time on the front veranda, even of a day. I mean, my grandmother would sit out the front, we would take the peas or the beans and we'd shell them out the front, and people would walk past. And after tea, you would sit out on the front veranda, and then people, I can remember the people that lived next door to me now, would walk down the street and they would stop and speak, and they'd go for a walk and then walk back, and you spoke to people and that. You mightn't visit them or anything, but you always spoke to people. And the kids run around the street, and there'd always be people sitting around, sort of thing. And I can always remember we'd sit on our front step, and in those days the police walked down the street, and particularly were what we'd call the Crown Sergeant and that, you know, and they'd come and speak to the kids, and you'd speak to them. You'd think it was wonderful that they come and spoke to you. I mean, you would never be rude to them. You thought it was nice that they spoke to you.
There wasn't hostility at all?
No, you thought, actually you were quite thrilled. They'd come over, you'd be a couple of kids sitting on the step, and he'd come over, because they were older men, being Crown Sergeant, and that, and you'd think it was a real thrill that they'd come and talk to you. I mean, it's not like now where you'd call them names, probably, and that. Yeah. And in those days, I don't remember, really, seeing any Aboriginals around here. I know they're down the other side of the railway now. We see quite a few around here now, but I don't remember as a child. But that doesn't mean, when I went to school, one of my friends was an Islander. I don't know where she came from, but I knew her. And we had a couple of Chinese girls in the class. They weren't, didn't think anything different of them, if you know what I mean. Except I can remember when we had project, they'd help you, because they were very good at drawing and things, which I wasn't, and they'd help you illustrate things and that, but they were never thought any different of. I don't know that we played with them after school, because they lived further down and their parents had a restaurant and that, they probably worked, but I mean at school there was no difference in them.
Can you remember any, what smells do you remember? So this is Redfern in the 40s.
Well, our biggest thing is up in, and they're still there, is Francis's Chocolates. It's up in Stirling Street, the back of where I used to live, and you used to always know when they were making caramels and things like that, because you could always smell all that sort of thing.
Did you ever go over and raid them? Or,
Well, you couldn't. I mean, you can't get in their place.
No.
And
Did they ever give you any?
no, the only time I ever had anything to do with them was when I was working at the school for, like, the P&C thing. I would go. They would make arrangements, and we would go and buy Easter eggs off them, and that. But it was for the school. They'd give a special price, but they were never. And we got lollies from them because we knew people that worked there, because they sold them to the employees, and if you knew somebody, they would often buy you things. But I mean, as the factory now, but we always knew them. I mean, Mr. Francis used to always drive, I think he had a Rolls Royce or a Bentley, one car, and we'd always know his car, and his son-in-law always drove an American car. We still see his son-in-law around, and that we knew them, but only by sight, sort of thing.
And what other smells? They had the smell of the chocolate factory.
Well, the only other thing was up on the corner of Redfern Street. There was a big barn sort of place, and they kept horses that used to. When I say horses, they were horses that pulled wagons. So I think it belonged to the what's his name? The politician's family. McMahon. And they had a place in Pitt Street further down. But I've got a feeling, only remember, that had to do with McMahon's, because they were to do with transport sort of thing, but it was horse and that. And then where the Chinese embassy's built, just up the street here, that used to be, it was next to the hotel. It was like a big hole. It had a fence, and that was a bottle yard.
Did you ever collect bottles to sell for the deposit?
Oh, I suppose we did a bit, but not a lot. I mean, we never had to do it, but I mean, you'd collect them from home and that.
What sights can you remember? Any particular images? When you think about that time, what pops into your head in terms of an image?
Oh, well, the things we used to go and look at, we used to often go just down the street there, and you can see the steam trains go along, because the railway is just down there. That's another one of actual smells, because you can smell, the trains. You used to smell the steam and that. But my most memories is going down Botany Road and that sort of thing. We'd go down there always for walks, shopping and that.
And that's Regent Street.
Yeah, used to call it Botany Road, because, as I say, everything we needed was down there, because Wynn's used to be a great place, and Wynn's, before they built their new place, used to have those, when you bought things, they put them in your docket and money in a ball, and it used to run by gravity all around the shop up to the office. And then they would put the change in, and you'd wait for the ball round to come round and back. It was great sport just watching the thing, you know.
What about sound? What sounds do you remember?
Well, mostly, as I say, from here we could hear the trains, and we also, at times you would hear the boats, you could hear the horns. Well, you still can, because, I mean, Darling Harbour is not that far, and that. But particularly you would hear, in those days, on weekends, you'd often hear the train whistles blowing, because they'd have a married couple on them. You know, people going for their honeymoon and that, and they'd blow the whistles.
Really?
Yeah, I suppose they'd tell the engine driver, you know, a thing. You'd often hear it. And in those days, too, particularly at Christmas, they used to ring the bells. I think it's up to do with somewhere up near the university. They have I think you call it a carillon. They used to play the bells. We used to hear them over like the Christmas time. And the local church used to ring a bell.
In the evening?
I don't remember it being every evening. I think they only did on Sundays and that.
Can you remember any local characters?
Yes. We had one chap lived behind us, and he was called the Yank. And I miss him terribly. they said he was called the Yank because he was went to America and was in jail there. Now, whether he was, I don't know. The story went that he still had the marks on his ankles from the chain gang. And he used to tell you stories. And he used to work, he always looked like he didn't have $2. But he always had money. He owned the house around there. He was very good to some of the local children. I know one girl, later in life, the family broke up a bit, and he used to put money for her under a stone in the lane and that. He used to go to the markets and help them, loading and unloading. I think he nicked a few things, but also some of the dearer shops would give him fruit that was like we call speck fruit, and he would bring it up on a barrow and he would sell it. And he would always come to our place, my grandmother's, and then later on when I moved here he'd still come to me, and if we weren't home he would leave what he thought, and you would get a big boiler full of fruit or a box full, and we'd sit up and it'd be apples, and you might lose half of it, but you'd sit up and we'd stew them. We'd sit up overnight cleaning apples and cook them, or we had mango. And I've never got over the price of fruit change, because he'd leave it to you for 2 shillings, and you'd get a box of maybe grapes. Well, some of them will go on mildew, you'd throw them out, you'd wash and clean the others. And you'd get mangoes, they would go and cook on one side. We lived on fruit and that. And
this is in the 40s?
Well, this is right up until after I came to live here, which I've been here about 25 years. He was still alive.
And all through your childhood?
Yeah, he always came round, and as I say, my grandmother got on well, and he always left us fruit, whether we were there or not. We'd always because we always lived on plenty of fruit because of what he would bring.
What's his real name?
No idea.
The Yank.
The Yank. I know he had a house round the back, and the story went that he had a beautiful bedroom suite that he had. Mum used to tell me he went into town, I don't know whether it was Mark Foy's anything or something, and he saw, how they had a display, and he told him he wanted that, and that was brought there. But I don't know, I know he died, but I don't really know much about him. As I say, no one knew anything about him, but he used to stand out the front, he'd always talk to us, and he'd quote poetry and things. And he'd tell you how when he was over there, he'd poked his own teeth out and things like this, not seeing a dentist. And he always had, as I say, he was very good at poetry. He'd tell you things he'd written and that. But no one ever, I never thought to ask him what his real name was. He was the Yank. And he had a wheelbarrow, and as I say, he would have been very well roamed down the fruit markets. He said he used to do a bit of help loading and that down there, and then some people would give him, if they left anything, I think he picked up a few boxes along the way, and he'd have boxes of fruit, but some of it good and some of it all the speck fruit.
Were there any other local characters?
Well, particularly him, I know, but he was the best known around here. I don't really remember any of the others. As I say, he only lived behind us. He lived not far from our local Member of Parliament.
And who was that?
Mr. Cope. We knew his family, we were always friendly. His sister-in-law used to have the shop down here, and my mother was very friendly with them, and they were a nice family. They always talked to everybody, and they never moved until he retired. They lived in the little back street here. And we used to often bump him at the club and that, or he'd see my husband, he'd always come over and speak to you,
It's Jim Cope?
Yeah, Jim Cope.
Federal Parliament. Did you ever go on holidays?
Well, we'd go to Wollongong, stay with relatives. But I'm a funny person, and my mother wasn't much different, although she changed a bit in later life. I don't move from Redfern. I don't like to go on holidays. I don't like to sleep away from home.
Well, did other people in the area go on holidays?
Oh, yes. As I say, we did a bit. We went up, relatives of ours had a bit of a cottage at the entrance, and we'd go up there sometimes, but mostly we'd go when I was young to Wollongong. And the funny part is my relatives don't live very far from the railway station, and they had rather big yard. It went down. It was big enough. They built a tennis court at the end, and they had a big garden as well. And they used to keep chickens, and we used to go and throw the mash at them. And my uncle used to go out rabbiting, and then he'd have the skins all stored there, and then he kept goats across the road, and I hated it. You'd lay there at night and you'd hear these goats baaing, and it was like country, and I don't like that. I like to hear cars going past and that sort of thing, and I used to hate staying down there because I like to hear move. And the funny part though is they're very close, they're almost right in the town of Wollongong. And in those times it was, there was a few vacant blocks around, it was like country. Same as I have a relative that lived at Auburn, and they had vacant block next door. And their next door neighbours had a horse and a cow, and they used to go out and collect the cow. And I always wanted to stay there. And then one night came, I wanted to go home, and the bus stop was outside their place, and they used to tell the story that when I was little, I wanted to go home, so they walked around the block carrying me and undressing me as they went, putting me in nice things, telling me they were going to take me home to try and get me to go to sleep But later on I can remember sleeping there, and I couldn't go to sleep. And a bus would pull up, and I'd say to my auntie, "What bus is that?" She'd say, "It's the picture bus." And the next one would come, and I'd say, "What bus?" I'd say, "The picture bus." And of course, my family was pretty straight-laced. They didn't swear much or anything. I turned around and I said, "Don't they have any other bloody buses but the picture bus?" I was getting exasperated because there was no other noises. And we didn't swear in those days. But that was only at Auburn. But to me it was country.
What's your happiest memory from your childhood?
Well, depending on what sort of things you think of, I was extremely happy when my sister was born, because I always wanted a sister. And after being 10 years old, it was a great thing. And of course when my grandparents always went for holidays, they went with my auntie and uncle. They used to go to Bathurst every year. And when my grandmother was home, she always bathed the babies on the kitchen table, in the bath. And when she went away, I took over. And that, because, I was always old enough to look after the kids. And that, didn't have to. I liked it. I took over the kids. And, I was very happy when my sister was born.
Was she born in hospital or at home?
No, at Crown Street. We were all born at Crown Street. She was born on Melbourne Cup Day, the day Russia won. And my mother, in those days, I don't really remember how, but we used to run racing things. Not that we were gamblers, but among the friends, you'd pick a horse for the races, and you'd get 3 points for first, 2 for, and whoever got the most points in the day won the pot sort of thing, It was only a couple of shillings, and then we always run sweeps among the neighbours for Melbourne Cup. And I can remember my father came down to the park to pick me up after school, and the park wasn't too happy, the teacher wasn't too happy to let him take me.
At the school?
Yeah, well, the school we were at sports that day at the park. She wasn't very happy about letting him take me home. He came to pick me up because Mum was going to go to hospital, but she had insisted on waiting for the Melbourne Cup to be run before she went to hospital. She wanted to hear, not that we were, in later life we didn't know one horse from another, but it was just those were the special interests,
What's your saddest memory from your childhood?
Well, there wasn't much when I was very little, because no one in our family ever passed away or anything. My biggest upset was my grandmother, but of course I was 18, 19 by then when she passed away. But before that, I lost my other grandmother when I was about 10, but we weren't close. I have funny memories about that, more or less, because she left what she had to my father. She didn't have that much. And her other son was more well off. They lived at, I think it was Flemington, but they didn't call it Flemington, they called it Homebush, because the Flemington stockyards. And he went to the funeral, and he came over to help us go through the house, and we had this friend with us. He was the chap that was in the Merchant Navy. And my uncle was saying, oh, if you don't want this, I'll have that. And if you don't want this, I'll take it. And my father, oh, all right. No. And I have these cups and saucers still out there. And he said, I like these, or something. And this friend of ours said, oh, well, if you want, it wasn't a full set either. Said, you take 2 set and we'll take 2. Oh, no, he said, I wouldn't like to break the set. And this friend of ours said, oh, you don't want them? Quick and pack them up. Yeah. And I still have them. I don't know that they're anything special, but I can remember. And then we came across the Harbour Bridge, and in those days you paid for how many were in the car. It was so much for a car and driver, and then I think it was 6pence, and then 3pence for each passenger. And we were in the back, and it was great fun because we had all this stuff, and Eric had a lampshade on his head, so you couldn't see him coming across. And we were sort of how many were in the car. He was making everything a great fun person,
He was disguised as a lampshade.
Just about. Well, we had the car full of all this stuff because we had to move it out of my grandmother's flat, sort of thing, But as I say, we weren't. Even though my mother always sent me to her, we were never that close because she was never a grandmotherly type. She didn't give us presents or anything. Made me sit on newspaper when she gave me a biscuit, which didn't upset my mother.
Made you sit on a newspaper.
When I was little, my mother didn't take that very well. Seeing we were rather good children, if you know what I mean. They didn't do anything, but my mother didn't think that was very nice.
Well, I want to thank you. It's been a really good interview. Is there anything else you'd like to say, or anything that
only that I really... it's so different now. Nobody knows anyone. I can name you, point to half a dozen houses across the road. I don't even know who's living there. You don't see them. Same with my next door neighbours. I mean, I know them, we speak to them, but I go days, weeks, don't see them. Which is a shame. I think,
Has the area changed physically much?
Well, they built flats. I mean, that house across the road, I believe it's the first Attorney General's house or something. But when I was young, where they built the units and all that round there, that was their yard. And we used to go across there and get eggs because they had chickens and that sort of thing, But we used to, I remember the propman used to come round, and the chap selling rabbits came every Wednesday, 9pence a pair. And that sort of thing, but you knew everybody. I mean, even the postman was the same one for years. Now people change. You don't get to know people like you used to.
There's a real sense of community then.
Well, that was it. I mean, people stayed for years. I mean, most of them didn't own the houses. We didn't own our house. My father never bought the house until just before I got married.
You didn't have problems with rent going up?
No, somebody owned the whole 4 houses, I don't know, and the only reason my father bought it was a matter of they'd sold the other 3, and it was a matter of buy it or get out. And they said, make him an offer. The agent came round. We used to have an agent come round and pick up the money. He said, make him an offer. Offer him £1,700. And my father said, I'll offer him $1,500, and they took it, and he got the biggest shock of his life. He didn't think they'd accept it, really, but he got the house very cheap. But he'd always looked after it, even though they only rented. He always looked after the house, And he never thought, whereas people these days all want to own, he never thought of owning a house. He was quite happy to rent.
A lot of people moved from this neighbourhood. Where did they move to?
Higher class suburbs.
Like where?
Well, the Cohens, they moved to Maroubra, which was funny because Mum went out to visit the old lady, and when Mum said, could I use the toilet? And she said, yes. She said, and when you go to flush it, you have to push the button. And Mum said, oh yeah, because Mum had been, they had them in town if nothing else. And then she said, no, look, Nell, don't you worry, I'll go and flush it for you when you're finished. My mother thought that was very funny because, I mean, even though we didn't have one at home like that, you went into town in the shops and that, and they had them because they had an outside toilet, but she didn't think we quite knew how to flush a toilet that didn't have a chain.
You would have had a sanitary cart man around, would you have?
I don't remember it, but I do remember it at Auburn. I know my aunties, it was terrible. You used to have to go down the toilet and there were spiders and everything, and it was smelly and all because they still didn't have sewerage.
Did you have sewage here?
As far as I remember.
No pangs?
No, I don't remember it ever being. But it might have been before me, because that's why they had the back lanes, I believe. But I know at Auburn, at Auntie Eunice, they did. We used to hate going down the toilet there.
Well, where else did people move from around here?
Well, the Clancys moved to New Zealand, most of them. And that, I don't know, a lot of them seem to move, when I think of people, and have heard of them since they moved interstate. But all the foreign people that came, they came in waves. I mean, we had the Greeks, and then we had about 4 families of Portuguese, and then they seem to come in. Now there's still a few Greek families, next door is there and that, but most of them move out because they want a bigger garden and that sort of thing, out into the newer suburbs. But I told them they've got to carry me out.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.